Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War and a discussion about Creative Assembly. Gameplay footage for this particular video is coming from Warhammer 3, the Old World campaign mod. Though you're not going to see the campaign map over here, but it is a custom campaign map that has been developed for Warhammer 3. It is currently available in the beta, though it's not publicly available. Anyway, when we're talking about Total War and we're talking about Creative Assembly, there has been a significant amount of information that has come out. I do believe that the vast majority of this information is coming from people that worked on Hyenas and are now either out of a job or are very insecure about their position in the company, so they're speaking up about a bunch of the issues that have been happening in the company. But I do want to note something, that it shouldn't surprise anyone what's going on right now with Creative Assembly, because many of these things were known to some extent or another long before this current batch of leaks, if you're paying attention. The problem with Total War, though, that has existed for a very, very long time is that it has fanboys that were willing to defend every single thing that Creative Assembly did. Basically, they had a bunch of religious zealots that were defending all of their actions. Oh, Total War games are like crap. Let's defend Creative Assembly not switching from 32-bit to 64-bit. Oh, the AI pathfinding is not that great. The diplomatic situation is not that great. Creative Assembly can do no wrong. There were legions of people defending Empire, defending Rome 2, defending Attila, defending Shogun 2. Yes, Shogun 2 did not launch in a great state. One of the things to point out, lots of instability, lots of lags. People want to pretend like, oh, the Avatar Conquest mode was great. Yeah, sure, if you ignore the shitty performance, the lag, dismal balance of the game absolutely was fantastic. I understand the PLI played it, but there were lots of issues with that. Lots of significant issues in general with a lot of Total War games. But the problem is that every time Creative Assembly did something like that, or sold something like Blood Pack or Unit Packs or Day 1 DLCs, yes, Warriors of Chaos, and even before that, Shogun 2, the greatest game in the series, according to some people, yeah, had a lot of horrible business practices. Same with Rome 2 with the Greek city-states. Horrible business practices all around the Creative Assembly. So is it any surprise that Creative Assembly has fallen so far? No. But what is perhaps a bit surprising is that things apparently were worse in the company than you might have expected. However, I do wish to note that for all the leaks that people like Volant, people like Bellular have gotten, it does match information we had previously before. In particular, I want to make the example of Darren, or highlight the example of Darren Total War, who literally worked for Creative Assembly. And what he was talking about, like once he left Creative Assembly, he talked a lot about the business culture within Creative Assembly. He talked a lot about office politics. Like I remember watching videos that he did on how horrible the situation was in the company, that the people with the most amount of power, the people with the most amount of sway with management were not necessarily the best and brightest, so to speak. That's what Darren essentially said, or the impression he left me in his videos, or his video on the subject. And now we're getting more information that reflects that particular perspective, that gives credence to what Darren was saying years ago. So it's not new. Things have not been great in Creative Assembly for a long time. The reason is that there's been a bunch of people that have been in the company for a very long time, and they're not willing to improve. They're not willing to change the way they do things. For them, the current direction of Total War is fine. And as a fellow content creator put it to me, Creative Assembly did not expect this situation. Like people like Rob Bartholomew or Mike Simpson and others within Creative Assembly did not expect the backlash of Shadow's Change. Now, there's a particular quote from Volant's latest video. I'll link his video. I'm no fan of Volant for a large number of reasons. His political views, his general attitude, the way he handles himself. There's a lot of reasons to dislike Volant, rightfully so. But He's the guy who's getting a lot of this leaked information right now. All right, so on the subject, there's a running joke that Creative Assembly runs half of Horsham. Like, we book an entire cinema for the company meetings, and when we're done exit the building, I see children ask, where do these people come from? In a quiet town, all wearing CA hoodies. A real-life Total War platoon. Now, this particular quote, this statement by a developer within Creative Assembly is fairly telling. See, Creative Assembly is very isolated as a company. And this is the problem, that the company culture that exists within Creative Assembly doesn't lend itself towards creating a good culture for great game development. Instead, you get a bunch of yes men, you get a bunch of poor management decisions, you get poor management in general, you get isolation. When you create that kind of environment in a company or any kind of group, when that kind of environment is created, there's not necessarily room or space for people that want to innovate, that want to improve things, that want to do things differently. And that's one of the biggest problems that has existed in Total War for a very, very long time. Yes, there have been improvements, but really, we can consider the fact that in Total War has not really evolved in a significant fashion since the days of Rome 1. Like, there's an enormous difference between Shogun 1 and Rome 1. Like, yes, Medieval 1 is similar to Shogun 1, but when you're looking at Shogun 1 to Rome, night and day difference, and much better as an experience overall. And while there has certainly been improvements in certain steps like stability, performance, AI pathfinding, and yes, Warhammer does have genuine improvements across the board, the Warhammer games, for instance, which some people may not want to give Warhammer that kind of credit, but there are genuine improvements with that. But the fundamental Total War formula has never really evolved since then, which is a problem. It's as if, to give you an example, imagine if Blizzard Entertainment never changed the formula of StarCraft from StarCraft 1, and it was still kind of doing games in that same formula, like if StarCraft 2 was similar to StarCraft 1. There are ways it was, sure, but let me just say, like, StarCraft 2 is a completely different game than StarCraft 1 in terms of campaign, in terms of multiplayer, in every aspect of the game. StarCraft 2 is a completely different beast. I think it's significantly better than StarCraft 1, though there are quite a few people, especially in South Korea, that do prefer StarCraft 1 to this very day. That's a different discussion, but clearly a different game and an evolution. Whether or not it was for the best in every way possible, the story aspect of StarCraft 2 is certainly the weakest point, but like, StarCraft 2 has some of the best campaign gameplay of any RTS that has ever come out, and that is to its credit. Whereas Total War, the way they handle campaigns, the way they handle the overall gameplay, the way they handle the mechanics, the way they handle development in general of these games has not really fundamentally changed for a long time. That's because of the isolation that Creative Assembly has created for themselves. They don't have any competition on the gaming market. No other company makes any series similar to Total War. So if you want a large-scale historical battle simulator with a campaign map, then Total War is really your only option. I mean, yes, you have things like Ultimate Battle Simulator and all that if you want large-scale battles, but that's more of a showpiece, cinematic showpiece, than actual battles, right? With any kind of strategy and challenge. That's really just about the showpiece. That's the problem. You don't have any game to compete with Total War, so they're not having competition from a business sense, and because of the way they operate in Horsham, isolated from the rest of the world, if you will. Again, they don't have any kind of competition. They don't have people that they're interacting with on a daily basis. They don't have any company to show them how things can be done differently. Now, to be fair, Creative Assembly has tried to branch out in different games. Every single one of those, with the exception of really Alien Isolation, has ended in failure. You can say, oh, Halo Wars, but Halo Wars was not really a great RTS experience. It was kind of mediocre, honestly. Great cinematics, amazing cinematics, and pretty solid story, absolutely. The gameplay, the graphics, like outside of those cinematics which CA didn't develop, that's a different discussion, really. I wouldn't say like CA did a great job with Halo Wars 2. But they certainly have tried doing other games. Alien Isolation, however, very different game, an amazing title, had its limits, had its issues, but they can show Creative Assembly can do things differently. However, there are leakers which point out that the management of CA didn't necessarily get involved in that. It was developed by a different team in a different location. So it wasn't the Total War team working in Horsham. And that's one of the problems. It's a recipe for a disaster. And in fact, the real question that should be asked right now with Total War is, how did they manage to get so far? How did they manage to get away with so much? Well, honestly, they wouldn't have. After the disasters, after Empire, Napoleon, they did buy themselves some time with Shogun 2, but they were kind of at the end of their rope with Rome 2 and Attila, but then they released Warhammer 1. And here's the thing about Warhammer 1. Like, that was kind of the saving grace, but it also prevented Creative Assembly from realizing where all the problems lay in terms of their core design. But you had a lot of people coming into Total War with Warhammer. You had the Warhammer fan base jumping on that. Because let me say this, as a Warhammer fan, and I am a Warhammer fan, getting a game of the kind of quality Warhammer 1, Total War Warhammer 1 did have, seeing all those units realized, seeing the world realized in a video game form was amazing. Regardless of how you might feel about Warhammer. And I've criticized the series. I've criticized 1, 2, and 3 in very significant ways. There are many issues with the Warhammer games, but if you're for a lot of people, the fact that the Warhammer world was realized in such a way as Creative Assembly pulled it off, that was amazing. And they bought themselves a significant amount of time with that, but also prevented them from really dealing with the reckoning that they rightfully had deserved since Empire. And this is what I'm getting to. That Creative Assembly has needed to change in a very significant fashion the way they develop things, the way they handle things within the company for a very long time now, well over a decade. And they never did. They never got to the point where they were forced to implement significant change in the company. Now, at the moment, they may not have a choice. The reason they may not have a choice at this very moment is because, well, they got nothing left. Basically, Pharaoh is dead. Hyena has just gone canceled. 40%, 50% of the company is being fired as we speak. And Warhammer 3 has gone down to 13,000 active concurrent users. It's dropped significantly ever since the disaster of Shadows change. Though I have to end this video with this particular point. Remember when so many fanboys, and I'm really struggling to not hurl insults right now at those people because I really despise them. But remember when the fanboys argued that, oh, we were just being entitled brats and all that? Well, you know what? Guess what? Here's the end result of ignoring the crap quality of a DLC, defending a company. And it's always stupid to defend a company when a lot of people are angry. It solves nothing. This is the thing. Being a fanboy solves absolutely nothing. And if anything, you're making the situation worse. What the hell do you owe Creative Assembly? Absolutely zilch. And ignoring the problem, well, guess what? You ignored the problem, you get the declining player base, and the game may die. Like, what I'm getting to is, after the disaster of Shadows change, and after the player base had basically said, enough is enough. We are not going to tolerate this. Pharaoh is a disaster, the worst launch in the history of the company, certainly the worst Total War game in terms of its launch numbers. And it's kind of a shame, actually, because Pharaoh is not the worst game to have launched in the Total War series. It's functional. It's not that great in terms of the battle balance and design, but it does work at the very least, which is something I wouldn't have necessarily said about Empire when it launched. Let's not pretend Empire was somehow a saint. No. Pharaoh has a lot of issues. I've detailed them, but it also failed to sell any significant number of copies. So Pharaoh's gone, Warhammer 3 is declining, Hyenas got cancelled, there's nothing else. Like, this is the point where Creative Assembly may not have a fan base going forward. And here's the issue as well. If they do not fix Warhammer 3, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, if they do not significantly improve Warhammer 3, I'm not talking about the asinine hotfixes we are getting for issues that should have been fixed years ago, and for issues that modders, many certain things, modders already fixed, by the way. And there's still a ton of issues that could easily be fixed or are not being fixed if Creative Assembly does not undertake a significant effort to improve Warhammer 3, to release Thrones of Decay at the lower price. And yes, I'm going to say it, there is no justification for releasing Thrones of Decay at a higher price than Champions of Chaos. That's my perspective. If they release it at $20 or $20 might work. I still think that's very high. But then again, I think Champions of Chaos was also overpriced compared to other DLC. But if they do not lower the price, and yes, this is going to matter, and if they just release another lore pack like Shadows of Change, and it can be either of these things, and if they do not fix the Empire, the Dwarves, and Nurgle, let's not ignore that, but really, Empire and Dwarves, if they do not overhaul the Empire and Dwarves, that's it. And if you think, and I'm going to say this right now, and I'm going to lay down this marker. If Creative Assembly thinks they can get away with not fixing the Empire and overhauling the Empire and Dwarves, regardless for all the stupid fanboys that think the Empire is fine right now, I mean, that's ridiculous. But regardless of that, if they think they can get away with not fixing the Empire and Dwarves, which are two of the most popular races in the franchise, in Warhammer Fantasy, if they don't fix them, they're gonna get an uproar that is gonna make everything that's happened so far seem insignificant. It's one thing to screw up and piss on Cafe, Kislev, and Siege, though to be fair, Cafe got improvements, but really not the improvements they needed. It plays better, but still not great. It's one thing to ignore Kislev, Cafe, and Siege, but if they think they can get away with another lore pack like that with the Empire and Dwarves, they've got another thing coming. And this is the most critical point. However, I really do wonder how much Creative Assembly realizes that they've got this ticking time bomb. I really do wonder, like, if they've even woken up at this point. Because their behavior so far seems to indicate otherwise. Like the bans that they've issued, the censorship they've engaged, the misinformation accusation, all those statements that have been made by Creative Assembly, the way they're acting right now leads me to believe that there are still these arrogant developers that think they know better than everyone else, that they're isolated, and they're in their little bubble, and they don't want to believe otherwise. Even as their world is crumbling around them, I don't necessarily believe. I think that the people in CA, the true believers, if you will, haven't changed at all. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Thrones of Decay does end up being an amazing piece of content. Maybe not. We will see. Questin here, signing out. Or maybe Sega brings the hammer down finally, because remember, they own CA. And whatever happens in CA, if you think Sega's fine with losing $100 million, I think you've got another thing coming. So Sega might save the company. Yes, the big bad evil publisher might be the last hope we have for Total War. I don't want the downfall of Creative Assembly. I don't think any content creator, any fan, and anyone that's a true fan, and there's a difference between being a fan and a fanboy, a significant one. No one that's played this series for years, no one that's poured their heart and soul into playing this series, or participated in the community wants this situation. But it seems there is no alternative right now. Creative Assembly really needs to be taken to task for how they have handled things so far. Because ultimately, regardless of how we feel about the series, it's just going to collapse financially, fundamentally speaking. And that's really what's going on right now. Questin signing out.